The wind howled like a wounded wolf across the parched land, kicking up a veil of dust that painted the desert town of Calico Bluff in shades of grit and regret. The sun bled over the horizon, low and red like a brand seared onto cattle flesh. Townsfolk moved with heads low and eyes shifty, because in Calico Bluff, men vanished, justice wore a crooked star, and names were currency best spent in whispers. The saloon's wooden doors creaked wide open, letting out a blast of laughter. And harmonica that died the moment he stepped inside. Grady Holt, leather duster coat. Dusty black hat pulled low over icy eyes. A Colt .45 holstered on one hip, a custom Bowie knife on the other. His face, unshaven and carved like mountain stone, looked like it had seen more than one man should. He wasn't tall in a towering sense, but every inch of him carried the weight of death. A man like Grady didn't need to speak. The room quieted on instinct. Even the piano stopped mid-note. He stepped to the bar, nodded once. Whiskey. The barkeep thin, nervous, with a voice that cracked like a green log and fire poured fast. On the house, Mr. Holt. Grady said nothing. He sipped. Then, his eyes moved to the thing plastered beside the mirror behind the bar. A fresh wanted poster, edges still crisp. Blood-red ink caught his eye. Wanted. Alara Vane dead or alive. $10,000 reward accused of murder. Sedition, theft of federal secrets. He narrowed his eyes. Alara Vane. He hadn't heard that name before, and Grady Holt had a memory like steel. He glanced again. The sketch showed a woman mid-20s maybe, hair tied back, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that seemed too calm for a killer. Most wanted posters made their prey look feral, unhinged. This one looked almost noble. That made him pause. 10,000 was no ordinary bounty. That was blood money meant to make killers salivate. And Holt had learned long ago, when the price was that high, the truth was often buried beneath the gold. Still, a job was a job. He stepped back out into the wind. The poster now folded neatly in his coat. Boots thudded against the dry boardwalk. As he crossed to the sheriff's office, if it could be called that, the place was leaning like a drunkard, sign half broken. Inside, Sheriff Culver, old and drunker than usual, sat with Boots propped on the desk, chewing tobacco and staring. At nothing. You posted it? Holt asked. Culver looked up, blinked, then sat straighter when he recognized the man. Ah, yeah. That came from high up, Holt. Washington, they say, secret stuff. Who is she? Culver shrugged. Used to work for the feds. Code breaker. Or spy or something. Word is she killed a judge in Kansas City and stole war documents. Rode west. Disappeared into the rocks. Proof? The sheriff gave a lazy smirk. They don't pay me to ask. You talking the job? Grady turned and walked out without answering. He saddled up midnight, his coal-black gelding, and rode out past the last traces of town. Behind him, Calico Bluff grew smaller with every hoofbeat. In front of him stretched the Red Rock country sunburn. Canyons, twisted sagebrush, rattlesnakes, and silence. The sort of land where secrets died and bones bleached under the sky. As dusk fell, he made camp near a dry arroyo. Firelight flickered off his knife as he cleaned it. The poster lay beside him, face up. Alara Vane stared from the paper, her gaze unreadable. He poured himself a measure of coffee, black as the night, and stared into the flames. He'd hunted down murderers, traitors, raiders. He'd seen the look in their eyes: rage, madness, greed. But Alara's face didn't match those. Her eyes held sorrow. Still, he told himself, a bounty was a bounty, and he was the best there was. The next morning, he rode into a windswept valley called Greaves Hollow, where travelers swore they'd seen a woman riding alone 2 nights ago eastbound. He found a crumbling homestead there, long abandoned, but someone had recently lit a fire in the stove. Ashes still warm, he dismounted, moved silently through the doorway, revolver drawn. Nothing. But there a book. Open on the table, a codebreaker's cipher journal, symbols and letters, pages half burned. She was here. He leaned down, saw a name. On the inside cover, E. Vane. She wasn't running blind. She was covering tracks. Back in town, others were sniffing the trail now. Young gunslingers, desperate drifters, Pinkerton men with smooth faces and expensive guns, all asking the same question, where's the woman? But they weren't like Holt. They were loud, sloppy, and already dead. They just didn't know it yet. That night, Grady sat alone beneath a jagged rock outcrop, sharpening his blade, watching the stars. Something about this hunt felt different. Not just the money. Not just the silence in her sketch, but the question that wouldn't stop burning in his gut. What if she didn't do it? What if the most wanted woman in the West was actually the only innocent one left? He exhaled smoke from his roll-up, crushed it under his boot, and leaned back into the dark. Tomorrow, the real hunt would begin, and Grady Holt, the man who never failed a bounty, was riding straight into the truth. The desert winds had shifted. They carried the scent of wood smoke, distant lavender, and something colder intent. Grady Holt knew how to read the land the way a priest read scripture. Every broken branch, every shifted stone, every absence of birdsong whispered something to him, and the land was whispering, "She's near." He followed a trail most would miss, boot prints half smudged in the sand, a flake of torn fabric caught on sagebrush, even a single brass button pressed into the dirt. Someone in a hurry. Someone who knew how to vanish, but maybe not well enough. By dusk, the sun was a bleeding orange coin over the ridgeline. Holt crested a slope of jagged shale and peered down into what locals called Black Hollow, a forgotten mining town left behind when the silver dried up. 5 crooked buildings, a broken well, and silence so deep it made his ears ring. He unsaddled midnight and moved on foot. Every step was slow, deliberate. He was a shadow on the wind, gun ready at his side, boots landing silent. The saloon doors creaked in protest as he pushed through empty. The floors warped and the shelves lined with dust. Then he saw it. A burning lantern flickering through the cracked window of the old blacksmith's barn. She was here. He didn't rush. Rushing got you dead. Instead, he circled wide through the dark, took the long way around the stable. As he moved, his eyes caught small details, fresh boot prints in the mud, a tin cup still warm near a fire, a set of bedrolls neatly packed. Not just passing through. She had stayed. Maybe days. He stepped inside the barn with his gun raised, and just like that, crack. Board above him shattered as a boot slammed into it. Grady fell sideways, instinct rolling him just in time to avoid a second blow from the shadows. She came at him like a whisper of wind and steel. A blade glinted in the firelight. He caught her wrist, spun her, but she twisted free with a grace that wasn't trained, it was lived. She wasn't a fighter by profession. She was a survivor. And then she paused. Their eyes met. For the first time, Grady Holt saw Elara Vane not on paper, not as a sketch or whispered name, but as a real woman. She didn't look afraid. She looked tired. "Go ahead," she said, voice like dry leaves. "You're the one they sent, aren't you?" He said nothing. She was breathing heavy, hair fallen out of her braid, cheeks streaked with soot. But her blade hand was still steady. "You? Got a name?" she asked. "Holt. Figures," she muttered. "They'd send him." He raised a brow. "You know me?" "Just enough." "They said you don't talk. Don't flinch. Don't fail." He stayed quiet. She lowered the blade just an inch. "So? You come to kill me, Mr. Holt? Or do you want to hear the part they left out of the story?" He tilted his head. "Make it fast." She sheathed the blade slowly, cautiously. "I didn't kill anyone. she said. I worked for the War Department decoding Confederate ciphers during the tail end of the war. I was good at it. Maybe too good. She leaned against a broken post. 6 months ago, I stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see: shipping ledgers, troop movements, orders signed by names you wouldn't believe. They weren't fighting a war. They were building a fortune from it, fueling both sides even after it was over. Holt frowned. That's when they came for me. Killed my fiancé. Said I'd hanged myself in a jail cell. She gave a bitter smile. Hard to do when you're still breathing. Holt watched her. No twitch, no flicker in her eyes. Just the kind of calm born from walking through fire and finding yourself still alive. Why the judge? He asked. She shook her head. I never met him. He was the only one willing to take my documents to Washington. They killed him and pinned it on me. She reached into a hidden satchel and tossed a bundle toward him. Papers. Not just letters, evidence. Signatures. Seals. Maps. All coded. All damning. I've been running ever since. He looked them over, just enough to know she wasn't lying. Still, a bounty was a bounty. He pulled out a length of rope. I'm taking you in. Her jaw tightened. To be tried or silenced? That's not my business. No, she said. Bitterly, it never is. But she didn't resist. She turned around and held out her wrists. Grady tied them. Gently. Too gently. They rode out before dawn. The wind carried the scent of mesquite and old sorrow. 3 days on the trail. Alara never once begged or pleaded. She rode in silence, hands bound, eyes scanning the horizon. She asked for water when she needed it, slept when told, ate quietly. Grady tried not to watch her, but he did. She didn't act like a killer. She didn't act like the hunted either. She acted like someone who had nothing left to lose. On the third night, a thunderstorm rolled over the hills. Lightning painted the landscape in flashes of white and bone shadow. They sheltered under an overhang, rain slicing the desert into rivers. That night, as Holt checked his revolver, Alara finally spoke again. You ever wonder what a man becomes doing what you do? He didn't look up. No. Funny, she said. You should, because I think you're starting to. He looked over. She wasn't smiling. Just watching him. I've seen killers, she said. Real ones. They don't hesitate. But you hesitated back there. Silence. And you're hesitating now. He finally met her gaze. Don't think you know me? She leaned back. Against the stone. No, she said softly. But I think you've forgotten who you are. Later that night, a rattlesnake slithered near their fire. Grady went for his gun, but Alara, hands still bound, moved first. She lifted a stick and pinned the snake's neck with calm precision, then tossed it into the fire. Grady stared. Army. Training? He asked. She smirked. Backwoods, Alabama. By dawn, something had shifted. Not in the wind. Not in the trail, but in him. And for the first time in years, Grady Holt wasn't sure he was on the right side of a hunt. Dawn broke like a blade-sharp silver, slicing through the mist curling over the drylands. Grady Holt rubbed a calloused hand over his stubbled face and scanned the horizon. Nothing but rust-colored hills and thirsty air stretching all the way to the canyon mouths. Elara sat by the fire, quietly chewing dried jerky, hands still bound but less tightly than before. She hadn't complained once. Not about the rope, not about the weather, not even about Holt's silence. Something about that unsettled him. Men he'd dragged in screamed, wept, threatened, but her? She watched him like she was waiting for him to remember something he'd forgotten about himself. They saddled up without words. The horses moved easy down the long slope toward Saltbone Pass, where the rocks closed in and shadows never fully lifted. Not even at noon. A good place for an ambush, and Holt knew it. but they had no other road. By mid-morning, the air grew heavy, tense, as if the earth were holding its breath. Holt slowed midnight to a crawl, eyes scanning high ledges. His instincts screamed something wasn't right. Even the crows had vanished. Then crack! A rifle echoed from above. The bullet missed Holt's head by inches and shattered a boulder. Behind him, midnight reared, nearly throwing him down. He shouted, yanking Alara off her horse just as more shots rang out from the cliffs. Dust exploded in bursts all around them. They hit the ground behind a rock outcrop, pinned. Grady's revolver was in his hand before he'd finished the fall. He counted at least 4 shooters from the echoes. Maybe more. He looked at Alara. She was bleeding from the arm but alive. Her hands still tied. With one quick slice of his knife, he cut the rope. "You planning to kill me now?" she asked, breathless. He tossed her a second revolver from his pack. "Kill them first." She didn't hesitate. She crouched low, pressed her back to the stone, and peered around. "They've got the high ground. Split across both ridges. If we stay here, we die." Agreed. Grady motioned toward a narrow goat trail leading upward. "Move when I fire. I'll draw fire. You'll die." He gave her a look that stopped her breath. Not yet. Then he leapt up from cover and fired 3 shots toward the east ridge. Bullets slammed back at him, one tearing through his coat, another chipping the rock by his head. Alara ran. She moved fast, nimble, every step measured. When she reached the trail, she turned and fired twice, hitting one of the riflemen square in the shoulder. He screamed and tumbled off the ledge. Grady followed her up the slope, ducking and firing as he went. Another attacker tried to flank them, young, reckless, armed with a sawed-off shotgun, but Holt dropped him with a single shot through the chuthy. Thigh. They reached a narrow ledge. Another man waited for them, their long black coat, teeth like piano keys, and a bounty star gleaming on his chest. "Grady Holt," he grinned. "Heard you were on this trail. Guess we're both after the same prize." Grady didn't flinch. "You're in my way." The man drew fast, but Grady was faster. One shot. Dead. The man crumpled like paper, hat rolling down the slope. Alara looked down at the fallen body. "You knew him?" "Used to ride with me," Grady said, "years ago." She looked at him sideways. "How many friends have you buried?" "Enough to forget their names." When the gunfire faded, only the wind remained. They left the canyon. Behind, trailing blood, silence, and smoke. Later, camped beneath a lone juniper tree, Alara stitched her own wound by firelight. Holt watched her from across the flames. The pistol he'd given her was back in his saddlebag, but she hadn't tried to keep it. "You sure those men weren't part of the marshal's office?" she asked. "No, they were bounty hunters." "Sent." "By who?" Grady took a long pull from his canteen. "Same man who hired me," she frowned. "But I thought you were supposed to bring me in alive." He nodded once. "They weren't." That sank in like a stone dropped in water. "They wanted me dead," she whispered. "They still do," she swallowed. "Why?" He looked her dead in the eye. "Because you're telling the truth." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Alara leaned forward. Her voice was low, almost afraid of itself. "Why didn't you let them take me?" Grady didn't answer immediately. He looked at the flames. Then at her. Then said the one thing he hadn't said to any bounty in his life. "I'm starting to believe you." That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She stared at the stars while Grady kept watch, pistol on his knee, eyes scanning the dark horizon. He didn't speak. He didn't hum or whistle. But in his stillness, she saw something unfamiliar. Maybe even something close to guilt. They traveled in silence the next morning. The terrain grew more treacherous, narrow trails above sheer cliffs. Alara's arm was bandaged, but her face was tight with pain. Grady offered her water. She nodded in thanks. He hadn't tied her hands again. That told her more than his words ever could. Around midday, they stopped by a shallow spring. As Alara bent to wash her face, Grady looked out across the flatland. Dust clouds. On the horizon. Riders. 3 of them. Not bounty hunters this time, Pinkertons, by the look of the coats. Government guns. Clean. Precise. They didn't move like drifters. They moved like men on orders. He cursed under his breath. More? Alara asked, standing beside him. He nodded. We need to go off trail, now. They rode hard, ditching the main path and cutting through cactus groves and dry riverbeds. Alara followed him without question. She knew now. She was no longer being hunted by men looking for a payday. She was being hunted by power. Grady held a man who'd been paid. To catch her was now her only shield. That evening, as the sun bled into the earth, they found shelter in a forgotten mission chapel. Its roof caved in and pews rotted away. Inside, amid the ruin, Grady lit a fire and finally spoke. I used to think all men were either prey or predator. But you, she raised her brow, you don't run like prey. You don't fight like a predator. Alara said nothing. She wrapped her shawl tighter and stared into the fire. Why me? She finally asked. Why not leave me tied to a tree? And ride off with the reward? He didn't answer right away. Then he looked at her. Because if I turn you in, I'd have to stop being the man I used to be. In the distance, thunder rolled. But it wasn't a storm. It was hooves. Closing in. The desert night held its breath. Inside the broken walls of the old mission chapel, firelight danced on dust-covered stones and worn wood carvings of forgotten saints. The roof had long since fallen, so stars looked down through broken beams. Like a silent congregation, Grady Holt sat alone, sharpening his knife with slow, steady strokes. Each movement carved silence like it was something real. Alara sat across from him, her bandaged arm resting in her lap, her back pressed to the cracked altar. She had barely said a word since they fled Saltbone Pass. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the kind of fear that went deeper than running. Or maybe, like Holt, she was beginning to realize they weren't just on the run anymore. They were at war. Earlier that day, they'd left the canyons behind and entered the highland snow-kissed ridges and treacherous switchbacks. The temperature dropped fast, and the wind carried no sound but its own. There were no towns, no ranchers, just wilderness watching them with ancient eyes. Grady didn't speak much on the trail, but his movements had changed. He no longer looked for signs of Alara escaping. He looked for signs of others closing in. His gun was always loose in its holster, and he no longer rode in front of her. Now he rode beside her. Inside the chapel, Alara finally broke the silence. You could still turn back, you know. Drop me off with the next marshal. Walk away with $10,000. More than you'll make the rest of your life. Grady looked up from his blade. I know, so why don't you? He didn't answer, but his hand paused on the knife. His jaw clenched. Then he said, because I think I already crossed the line. Later that night, as Alara drifted into restless sleep, Holt stepped outside. The moon hung low, casting silver over the broken chapel stones. He walked to the edge of a cliff overlooking the valley below. That's when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Distant, measured, controlled. He dropped to one knee, scanning the shadows. A single rider, maybe two. No campfire. No noise. Too clean. Too professional. He waited until the riders vanished into the darkness, heading west. Then he turned back to the chapel. He needed answers. The next morning they rode through frost-bitten trails, breath rising like smoke. Snow had dusted the peaks overnight, and the silence was deeper now. Grady steered them toward a small mining outpost called Three Pigs Ridge. long abandoned by gold and God alike. But Holt remembered something most didn't. A man lived there. Man who owed him. They reached the ridge by mid-afternoon. The shack was barely standing, but smoke curled from its crooked chimney. Holt dismounted, motioned for Alara to stay back. He knocked once. The door opened a crack. A double-barrel shotgun met him in the face, then a gruff voice grunted, "Holt?" "It's been a while, Mitch." The door opened wider. Mitch Crowley, gray-haired, one-eyed, face like old leather, let out a low laugh. "Thought you were dead." "Not yet." Inside, Holt handed Mitch a sealed envelope. "I need to know who's behind the bounty on Alara Vane." Mitch opened the envelope, whistled low. "Hell, son. These are Pinkerton files." "Can you read them?" "Of course I can read them. I used to write them." He looked over the papers. "Three names stand out," Mitch muttered. Judge Allen Creeley, General Monroe, Senator Briggs. All tied to a weapons contract that should have ended 2 years ago. Instead, they kept it alive. Moved weapons across the border. Paid off court clerks. Covered their trail. Alara listened. From the corner, arms crossed. "They used her," Mitch added, gesturing to Alara, "probably without her even knowing it. And when she found the trail, they put a price on her head," Holt finished. Mitch nodded grimly. "Biggest one I've ever seen. But it ain't to bring her in. Not really." "She's not supposed to survive," Holt said flatly. Mitch looked at him long. "You planning to keep running with her?" Holt didn't answer. "You know what that means," Mitch added. "You go that road, there's no coming back. No more jobs. No more safe towns. They'll label you a traitor. Hang your name on the next poster." "I know," Holt said. Mitch stared. Then finally muttered, "Hell, maybe it's about time someone did." Back outside, Alara stood near her horse, jaw tight. "You know now, don't you?" she asked. "Everything I said. It's real." "I know. So what now?" Holt looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "Now we ride south." They crossed into the southern range by moonlight, keeping to the narrowest trails and cutting through snow-fed rivers. Grady no longer looked over his shoulder out of habit. He looked because the hunt had flipped. They were being tracked, and not just by bounty hunters, by men in suits. Men with government badges and men with quiet smiles who used bullets in place of questions. One night, as they camped beneath a rusted train trestle, Grady finally shared something he never told anyone. "I used to have a family," he said. Alara glanced over. "What happened?" "I was out on a job, weeks away. Came back to find the town burned. Nothing left. House, wife, little girl. All gone." Alara was silent. "I blamed the men who lit the fire. Then I blamed myself for not being there." He stared into the darkness. "But after a while I stopped blaming anything. I just became the flame." Alara's voice was soft. "You can't burn forever." "No," he said. "But I can burn the ones who lit the first match." The next morning they were ambushed again. This time by Marshal Wendell Tate, a lawman known for shaking hands with devils and tipping his hat at executions. He came with 5 men, all in government coats. No bounty posters this time. No warning. Just bullets. The fight was fast and bloody. Alara took cover behind a dead tree and returned fire. Holt ran into the open like a man with no name left to lose. He shot 2 clean center mass, took a graze to the shoulder. Alara hit another in the leg. Grady finished him. Only the marshal remained. They cornered him behind a boulder. He raised his hands. "You've made a mistake, Holt," he spat. "You're killing your own country." Holt stepped forward. "I'm killing the lie that's killing it." The marshal drew. Holt didn't hesitate. One shot, dead. Afterward, Alara stared at the body. "He was supposed to take me in," she whispered. "No," Holt said. He was supposed to bury you in the sand. That night, Ilara stood over the fire, hands trembling. They won't stop, she said. You know that, right? We could ride to the edge of the world and they'd still come. I know, he replied. She looked at him. Then why stay with me? His eyes met hers. Because when I looked at them, and then I looked at you, I realized I don't want to live in their world anymore. The line had been crossed. Grady Holt, the hunter, feared by killers and kings alike, was now a wanted man, and for the first time in years, he felt free. The wind screamed through the narrow mountain pass like the last cry of a dying man. Snow drifted in spirals around the trail as if the heavens themselves had turned their backs. It was the kind of cold that gnawed through your bones and whispered, "Death in your ear." But Grady Holt and Ilara Vane kept riding silent, resolute, weary-eyed behind them. Death followed on horseback. They had crossed the foothills south of Duskwind Gulch, now headed toward a lonely stretch of jagged redstone. Red Mesa. It jutted from the white earth like a bleeding wound. Holt knew the place. He'd once buried a man there. And now he might be buried in turn. They hadn't slept in a day and a half. The horses were faltering. Ilara's cheeks were raw from the cold. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, but she didn't complain. She just kept her eyes forward and her hand near the saddlebag that held the documents. Documents that could destroy powerful men. Holt scouted the ridge ahead. We'll hold them off at the Maza, he said, wiping ice from his mustache. One way in, one way out. Ilara stared up at the towering spires of rock, their tops swallowed in a swirl of gray mist. You think we'll make it? He didn't answer, just dismounted and started walking. They climbed to the plateau, windswept and open. No cover, no retreat. But from there, Holt could see for miles. He laid out his repeater rifle, checked his pistols, and scanned the distant trail for movement. Ilara approached him, clutching her coat. You could still walk away, she said. They'll pay you double to hand me over. He turned to her. Slowly. If I was that man, you'd already be in chains. She studied his face. Then why stay? He didn't speak for a long moment. I've killed for money, he said at last. I've burned bridges I can't rebuild. This is the only thing I've done that feels worth dying for. A sound behind them, low thunder. Horses. Coming fast. They're here. Holt muttered. Ilara grabbed a rifle, knelt behind. A boulder? Holt set his stance by the narrow choke point, the only pass wide enough for a horse to charge through. Minutes later, they came 5 riders. Guns raised, shouting over the storm. The man at the front wore a black hat and silver star. Marshal Keene, he called out, voice like a blade. Ilara Vane. Turn yourself in. The law will be merciful. Holt shouted back, rifle aimed squarely. I've seen your mercy, Marshal. This ends here. Keene sneered and raised his hand. Fine, let's do it your way. Gunfire split the morning silence. Like lightning, the first rider fell before he could draw. Holt fired again, catching another in the shoulder. Ilara fired 2 of her bullets, slamming into the rocks beside Keene, sending him ducking behind his horse. Smoke. Screams. Thunder. They returned fire with fury. A bullet tore through Holt's coat. Another grazed Ilara's leg. Blood soaked through her pant leg, but she grit her teeth and kept firing. Then a click. Holt's rifle jammed. He ducked just in time as a bullet whizzed past his ear. With lightning speed, he drew his Colt revolvers and let them sing. 3 shots. 2 enemies dropped. One stood. Marshal Keene rode straight at them now, a devil with a badge. He was shouting, "She dies today, bounty man. And if you stand in my way, you go first." Holt didn't move. He stepped forward into the open, holstering one pistol, drawing his long knife. His coat billowed like a specter in the wind. You? Sure about that? Holt growled. The marshal fired. The shot hit Holt in the shoulder. He staggered but kept coming. Another shot. Holt dropped to one knee, breathing hard. Keene laughed. "I told them you'd lose your nerve." But he didn't see Alara behind the stone's steady hands, teary eyes, rifle aimed straight at him. One. Shot rang out. Marshal Keene fell off his horse like a puppet with cut strings. Silence. Snow began to fall again. Alara rushed to Holt's side. He was pale, bleeding from his shoulder and chest. His breath was short, shallow. No, don't you dare," she whispered. Cradling his head in her arms, he coughed, blood on his lips. "You all right?" He rasped. "I'm fine," she said, voice breaking. "You're not." His eyes searched hers. "You get across the border. Take that truth where it matters. Don't let them bury it." "You're coming with me," she whispered. "We'll both go." Holt gave her a faint, crook smile. "Don't think I'll make it." "But it's all right." He touched the edge of her scarf, the soft red fabric now damp with snow. "You gave me peace," he murmured. "Didn't think a man like me could earn that." She shook her head, tears falling. "You earned more than that. You saved me." His hand dropped. The snow fell harder. But Alara didn't leave him, not yet. She sat there, holding him, until the sun broke through the clouds and bathed Red Mesa in light. And then she stood. She picked up the saddlebag. Picked up Holt's badge, one he'd never worn but always carried, strapped on his revolver belt, and began walking south, toward truth, toward justice, toward the border. Behind her, the most feared bounty hunter the West had ever known lay in stillness. But he didn't die for gold. He died for honor. The storm had passed. Atop Red Mesa, where blood once ran across the snow, the wind now whispered gently through the canyons, carrying stories westward like the spirits of the dead seeking final rest. Beneath a lone cedar tree, Grady Holt lay, buried, his grave marked only with stones and a knife plunged into the dirt, its handle wrapped in faded red silk. A quiet tribute from the woman he died protecting. Alara Vane had ridden south, wounded, grief-racked, but burning with the final spark. Holt had left her hope. She carried with her the documents he helped preserve. Inside them, names, crimes, signatures, secrets so dark they could topple the mighty. Railroad barons, judges, generals, men who wore the law like a cloak and used it like a whip. She reached the border town of Alamos, Edge, after 4 days in the saddle, starving, weak, but determined. The last leg of her journey ended in a smoky cantina with tin cups, greasy eggs, and men who looked through her as if she were a ghost. But one man, a Mexican journalist named Arturo de Santiago, recognized her name. "Alara Vane," he whispered. "You're the woman they say rides with ghosts." She handed him the leather-bound pouch. "Print every word," she told him. "Let the world know." He opened the papers, eyes widening with every line. "My God, no," she said. "Their God, their money, their crimes. It ends now." Arturo nodded. That night, under candlelight, the first copies of the Duskwin papers were printed. A manifesto. A revelation. A reckoning. The next morning, the news shot across the region like wildfire. In San Antonio, judges resigned. In Santa Fe, the railroad halted. In Austin, men fled into the hills. Names were named. Crimes exposed. Deaths connected. Alara's name was printed in every headline, but not as a criminal, not as a fugitive. As a truth-teller, a witness. A survivor, they called her, the widow of the West, the woman Holt died for, the Red Mesa rider. But she didn't stay to enjoy her legend. Alara disappeared. Some say she rode deep into old Mexico, started a school for girls who had no fathers. Others claim she wandered the Rockies, helping women escape mining towns and brothels, leaving a red ribbon tied to every gate she passed. and others still say she never left Red Mesa, that her ghost walks among the stones, guarding the grave of the only man who ever saw her heart, years. Later, in a quiet Arizona saloon, a child asked an old gunslinger by the fire, "Did you ever meet the Red Mesa Rider?" The man took a sip of whiskey, staring into the flames. "No," he said, "but I met the man who gave his life for her. And I seen what kind of woman a man like Grady Holt would die for. What was she like?" The boy asked. The old man smiled, eyes misting. She was thunder and silence. Fire wrapped in snow. She was the last story this land ever told with its heart wide open. And so, in the history of the West, where gunmen were worshipped and outlaws feared, only a few names endured. One of them belonged to a woman who was hunted like prey and became a legend instead.